Hello.
Awesome. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to meet again.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you too. It's been quite some time since we met last time.
Well, it has, hasn't it? We've had COVID in between, so how the world has changed.
I know. I mean, back then, if we only knew what was coming, we probably would have traveled more, done a few more things before. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I know everyone has a busy, like schedule.
Thank you for inviting me, and lovely to be here.
Thank you. And I would like to start by asking you if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more what you do, who you are.
Well, my name is Sam Simpson. I'm British, so I live just outside London here in the UK with my family. Um, I mean, we met through a talk that I was giving as a speech and language therapist. So I trained as a speech and language therapist in the 90s and qualified all the way back in 1995. And since then, I suppose, what is that, 26 years I've worked as a speech and language therapist. I've worked in a number of different fields. Initially, I straddled both working in a brain injury unit for about 10 years, as well as working at the City Lit, which is a centre for excellence for stammering therapy in London, facilitating groups for people who stammer. And then, later on, I've moved into independent practice and work much more exclusively with people who stammer as a speech and language therapist in independent practice, so offering one-to-one and group sessions. But I also then went on and retrained as a person-centered counsellor. I think, I was very interested in communication disability, and I discovered a real interest in the person, in how people live with communication differences, and so went and retrained. And so now I work, my week is divided really. I work as a person-centered counsellor for some of the week, and as a speech and language therapist, alongside offering supervision for trainees and for practitioners, and running courses. So I have quite a varied working life, really. You're probably getting the feel of the fact I like variety.
That sounds really cool. If I may ask, what was it that triggered for you that made you focus on like stammering? Was there anything that happened particularly, or was just something that you slowly started to pay more like attention to it?
Actually, when I was training to be a speech and language therapist, I was very fortunate in my second year to have a placement at the City Lit, working with Carolyn, Cheasman, and Corinne Moffat also was there at the time, and Jan Logan. And I think it was a revelation, really, because having that opportunity to work in an adult education setting where I was outside of the medical frame, where students were signing up on a course about stammering to learn about stammering and themselves, I think I really liked the fact that it was taking, I don't know, that sort of pathological view. It wasn't part of the course, and it was very much based on person-centered principles, really. So it also fostered my interest in the person-centered counselling and working with the whole person. So I loved being a student there. I was, really enjoyed meeting the students that I was able to work with over the course of that year, and it just sowed a seed. I was fascinated by stammering and the experience of stammering, and by stammering therapy and the potential breadth of stammering therapy. So that's what hooked me in right back in what that would be 94 now.
Time flies, I know.
It does.
But that's really cool. And you are one of the authors of the book called Stammering Pride and Prejudice. Could you please tell us a little bit about this book and what are the key conclusions and the ideas behind it, please?
Oh, that's a big remit, but yeah, I mean, I suppose if I go back to the sort of seeds of the book, in my second year of training, I was very fortunate to have a tutor, Carol, who was very interested in the disability movement, and gave me things to read and signposted a range of different resources, really, that were very much about viewing disability as a civil rights and justice issue as opposed to a medical issue. So she opened up my eyes really to different narratives around disability, and the alternative frames of reference, really, from seeing impairments in terms of deficits, or the automatic need for therapeutic interventions, if you like, and that expert practitioner model. And so I mean, it was challenging at the time, as I was training to be a speech and language therapist, to be reading materials that were essentially highlighting quite the sort of narrow focus of restorative therapy, and how that could serve to reinforce and reaffirm social norms and stigma, really, as opposed to offering a means of challenging or maybe restoring and developing new meanings around difference. So I think Stammering Pride and Prejudice grew from that interest and those foundations, if you like. Meeting Patrick Campbell, who at the time was a medical student who stammers, and Chris Constantino, who was a speech and language therapist who stammers over in the States. You know, I think we were aligned in that way of thinking, I guess, and that sort of wanting to explore alternative ways of looking and understanding stammering. So the book itself positions stammering and the therapy discourse very much within the broader disability discourse. That was one of its aims, as a means of revising and extending our understandings of stammering and of therapy. It's a compilation of different voices. Hopefully it brings together myriad different voices talking about stammering. So, you know, some of the chapters are written by academics, some by therapists, some by therapists who stammer, some by parents of children who stammer, a whole range of people who stammer, of different ages, different backgrounds, different careers, who are speaking of their personal experience of stammering and the new meanings and understandings that they've developed of stammering. So the title is, you know, Pride and Prejudice. The book speaks to prejudice in relation to stammering. You know, there are lots of stories of people talking about the dominant narratives around stammering. So that may be the sort of medical frame, seeing stammering as a problem, seeing stammering as something that is disordered or broken, and how those views can be internalized and therefore become quite self-oppressive. But the narratives also speak to the structural and environmental and attitudinal barriers within society, and people's experiences of those throughout childhood, in education, in the workplace. But it also speaks to the growing pride movement, and captures, I think it's a unique text because it captures some of the compelling new meanings and understandings of stammering that people are developing, and hopefully acts as a celebration of stammering as a unique and legitimate way of speaking in and of its own right. And that's explored in different ways, through narrative, through personal essays and reflections, through poetry, through art, personal stories, short stories, and I hope it's a book that will challenge people to think about stammering differently, to understand the varied experiences of stammering, and will invite reflection and introspection, really, as well as encouraging people to find out a bit more about new thinkings, new meanings, and some of the more stammering activism, I suppose, new movements within the community.
Do you think, from your experience, the challenge of self-acceptance comes mainly from the fear of what people think of us, of how people will judge us because we have a speech impediment, or is it something else, or is it more something within ourselves that is not really related to how people see us?
That sort of internal versus external,
Yeah.
or is it an interaction of the two, really? I think increasingly I'm interested in the idea of it takes two people to stammer. Stammering doesn't happen in a vacuum, and a lot of the people I work with are often intrigued or confused by the fact that their experience of stammering can be so unpredictable and so different across different situations, speaking to different people. It's the enigma of stammering in many ways, and I think it's really important to see stammering in context and to look at what maybe you as an individual are bringing to the experience of stammering, the understandings you've come to hold about stammering, and how you come to view it, as well as looking at the environment, really, and the contributing factors in the environment. I think if a lot of people I work with, I work primarily with adults who stammer, and it's quite interesting whether stammering was talked about or not talked about as a child, just the messages really that they have come, either implicit or explicit, but they've come to understand about stammering. And almost in the silence around stammering, that there can be understandings that it is something that is unwanted, something that is unspeakable about, and therefore something, that internalization of something that it's important not to do. And I think it's just very important that we shape environments to make them more stammer friendly, and to cultivate that understanding that, I really believe it is okay to stammer, and it's supporting families, it's supporting educational environments, it's supporting workplaces, really, to help foster that, so that people don't internalize and construct negative ideas and understandings of stammering that can lead to struggle and can lead to avoidance and a lot of strong and difficult emotions. So I don't know, hopefully that answers your question. I think both contribute.
And based on your experience, what do you think is the best approach to stuttering, and why?
Yeah. I mean, that's another big question, isn't it, really? I mean, I think fundamentally there is no one size fits all in terms of approaches to stuttering. I think it will always be an individual choice, and I trust an individual to know what they feel is right for them, or what is going to be most helpful for them at any point in time, in the understanding that actually what somebody, the support somebody wants for themselves, perhaps around stammering, will change over the course of their lives. I think what's important though is informed choice, that certainly in terms of speech and language therapists, I think it's really important that we lay out all of the different options in terms of therapy, and almost, look at the cost benefit, what the advantages are to some approaches, and the disadvantages, so that clients, parents, young people can make informed choices about therapy that works best for them. But for me personally, I think there are a number of fundamental premises. One is it is really okay to stammer, and I don't see stammering as broken or defective. I really see stammering as a legitimate way of speaking in and of its own right, and I think that's an important stance to be weaving into therapy at the beginning, and alongside that concept of it takes two to stammer. I think they're two really important foundation stones, really. But when people enter therapy, I think it's important to get curious about their stammering, get curious about maybe the more visible aspects of their stammering, and the more internal experience of stammering, and the contributing factors. I know, the iceberg is a common analogy, isn't it, really, around stammering, in terms of what is visible and above the water, and maybe what is under the water and only known to the person who stammers. I'm particularly interested in what's in the water, in terms of experiences, attitudes, understandings of stammering that can shape the experience and give a much more complete picture, really. So I think it's important, for example, that people understand the different ways stammering's talked about, the different frames of reference, that the sort of medical language that is so dominant around stammering is only one frame. There are alternative ways of talking about stammering, particularly if we think about neurodiversity and the celebration of human variation and difference, and position stammering within that frame, then there's suddenly a shift in perspective, and so I think it's important that people gain that understanding, and can therefore make more choices about how they want to see and understand stammering for themselves. I'm very interested in this concept of ableism, that we do live in a world that has been designed for fluent speakers, and I think that can, or often is, quite traumatizing for people who stammer, and I think it can be really helpful for therapy to be making space to acknowledge actually some of the difficulties of speaking speaking disfluently in a world that has been designed for around fluency, and I think understanding. I'm also really curious. I know she and Joseph, actually it wasn't Sheehan. I've got a momentary lapse of attention, but the idea that stammering is what people do trying not to stammer is really interesting. I see that in my work all of the time, that if people can become more comfortable letting themselves stammer, experiencing all of the feelings that come up in that momentary loss of control, and can develop their window of tolerance for that and stay grounded, then the struggle around stammering significantly decreases. And so I think understanding what can drive that struggle and that desire to not let yourself stammer is really important, and an important part of therapy. And I suppose part of my approach is helping people develop that window of tolerance, develop that openness and that more allowing attitude to stammering, and to kind of lean into it, as opposed to trying to avoid it or struggle. Alongside, that two-pronged, if we're thinking about it takes two people to stammer, then there is a shared responsibility of people then in your environment. So I think, it's important to develop a willingness to be open about stammering, to open conversations about stammering and break this conspiracy of silence. So therapy may be about developing ways of it's interesting, this idea of disclosing, isn't it, which is the common term, but just sharing and talking about stammering openly, and being willing to let people know what helps and what doesn't help in a communication environment, so that responsibility can be shared, I think is really important, because it's about cultivating the environments, I think, for people to feel free to say what they want when they want, whether they stammer or not. That fundamentally is what feels important. And then, a lot of what I've been saying sounds like it's very one-to-one. I think there is a real place for community. In many ways, that's the ethos of the community that you're trying to set up online. I think group work, support groups, just helping people become more aware of the stammering community and what's available and what's on offer, and the conversations that are being had within the stammering community is really important. It feels an exciting time, and I think actually there's often only a very small percentage of the stammering population who engage in the broader stammering community. I was talking to someone recently who was quoting sort of 1%, and that is such a small percentage of people, when there is so much to gain from that shared experience and shared support and shared understanding.
You mean only 1% of people who stutter, who are part of communities like stuttering communities, things like this?
The real minority, yeah, it's quite a striking minority, and so it is about how, so actually, then it's sort of what is the experience of the other 99% really, who are not perhaps feeling so connected, and I'm interested to hear about their experience, because their voices are not often heard. And yet in my experience, actually, it's so liberating when people take that step and meet other people and hear different stammering voices and different experiences. But it's, I think it's interesting to be thinking about how to be encouraging and supporting more people to be taking that step if they would like to.
You mentioned about understanding and also our awareness. And coming to that topic, there are many myths about like stuttering. What is stuttering? And many people have very, very little knowledge about this topic. What do you think people should know, like some basic facts about stammering that people should know?
Yeah, that's a very, I think it is, it's very important, isn't it, that we have some solid information out there that is readily available. I think for me, central understanding that feels really important is that stammering is a neurodevelopmental difference. It's a neurodevelopmental speech variation, and I think also, so often the language around stammering is one of defect, and I think increasingly what is interesting is if we put down that frame of reference as seeing stammering as disordered, and something that needs to be fixed, to actually sort of resisting the temptation and giving stammering space and thinking, actually, what can stammering teach us? What does stammering reveal to us about the world, about the societies that we live in, about the values that dominate right now, and about our communication norms? I think what stammering has certainly taught me, or shines a light on, I think, is just the culture we have at the moment of, there's something about productivity and efficiency and excellence that our societies operate around and value, be that at school, be that at work, and this sort of fast pace, efficient world that we seem to be cultivating. And I think, for me, stammering shines a light on that, actually, and maybe I don't know, some of the unhelpfulnesses or the sort of shadow side of this narrative and way of being that we're trying to cultivate in society. I think it invites an opportunity to maybe slow things down, to invite a different perspective, a different frame, and to come back to what is really important, actually, by way of maybe connection, by way of I don't know, just making time to really be together and connect in a more meaningful way. I know Chris Constantino often talks about how in this fast-paced world, a lot of our communication exchanges are quite trite, really. We sort of have these encounters that are quite we're not really very present for, and are well rote and quite automated, really, in terms of social exchanges. And stammering in a way throws a kind of wrench into that, and shines a light on it, and in that moment can, I don't know, invite a more real and a more immediate exchange that can feel much more connecting in the moment. So I think that's what I'm interested in. Is just what stammering can reveal and show us. And I think there's a lot of new ways of looking at understanding stammering that are emerging through the creative arts. So I know Jerome Ellis has been exploring music. He's a musician and a poet, and just drawing parallels between music and different tempos, and sort of rhythms and expectations within music, and the potential of stammering to offer, sort of different rhythms and different tempos in communication. And I know Paul Aston has been looking to paint the moment of stammering, and to again see what that reveals by trying to capture this moment through art, and slowing, just slowing those moments down. And I think I just feel excited, excited by these new perspectives.
Are there any practical, like, speech exercises that people who stutter can try at home? If so, which ones?
I don't know so much about exercises, but I think there are some practical actions possibly that people can take if they would like to. I think first of all is maybe start conversations about stammering, to break that silence around stammering, and to share something, your experience, with people around you, in order to start making the environment around you more stammer friendly. So I think that being willing to be a little bit more open, and to share the responsibility, by educating and informing other people of what, of sort of how to make the environment more stammer friendly. I think that can be really helpful. I think, as we were talking about earlier, if you feel comfortable to actually finding other people who stammer, is something practically that you can do to support yourself, and that might be through support groups, that might be online, through the community that you are creating, that might be through charities like here in England, British Stammering Association, or the National Stuttering Association in America. There's a whole host now. I think the move online, there's so many webinars and podcasts. You've got the brilliant Stutter Talk, for example, and I know you're putting on podcasts too, and talks like this on your site. So even if actually meeting other people who stammer in person feels a bit too much, there are ways of just reaching out and hearing more stammering voices, hearing people talking about their experience of stammering, and just hearing a bit more about what's happening in the stammering community. And I think, I suppose there's something about getting curious, just getting curious. That follows in, I think it is a really exciting time for stammering. I think, I don't know, I know there's a sort of feeling of social change more globally, I think, in terms of positive psychology, and just, I don't know, changing narratives about gender and sexuality, and just much more fluid understandings of the world. And I think it's sort of getting curious as to how this is rippling out, and in terms of how we're talking about stammering, is really, really useful. But I think also it's exciting in terms of the different resources that are out there. So I'm a supporter and quite actively involved in 50 Million Voices, which is a charity really looking at trying to develop more stammer-friendly cultures at work for people who stammer. And they put on practice interview events that people across the world can get involved in. So again, if you are curious and aware of what is available within the stammering community, then you can access specific support. Say those young people coming out of university and looking for employment, there are mentoring programs run by mentors who stammer that may be of interest. And so I think, there's just this growing momentum within the stammering community, I think, for change and for support that it would be really lovely for people to know about more.
And I think especially in the workplace, it's so important to really try to bring awareness, because so many people who stammer, they are fully capable of like performing the job they are trying, they are like applying for, but they don't get the job only because they have a speech impediment, and that's not fair. So I think if you can try to bring more like awareness to the workplace and try to make it more fair, it would be brilliant.
Absolutely. Well, I think everyone stands to gain, because at the moment the workplace is missing out. They're missing out on all of the, the full potential of people who stammer. And not only will it benefit people who stammer, but it benefit employers and organizations, I think, if we can make these environments much more stammering friendly and broader within that, sort of disability friendly, more widely.
Totally, yeah. And our last question of the day. What piece of advice would you give to people who stammer?
Yeah, what piece of advice? I think to question the assumed is probably my final piece of advice. I think what engaging with the disability rights movement, for example, has taught me is we live in a world with so many social constructs that can feel like they are absolutes and that they are givens. And actually, with a little bit of kind of questioning and curiosity, they're often not quite as solid and as robust as we think they are. And so I guess, you may have a way of thinking about stammering and understanding stammering. And my invitation is to question that, to be open to the possibility of there being other frames, and to maybe get curious and explore that, and then be able to make a much more informed decision about the language you use and your understanding of your own experience. So yeah, question the unassumed.
Thank you, Sam. That's great advice. Thank you so much. It's so necessary to talk about like stammering and all these topics around the speech disorders and disfluency, because sometimes it's still a bit of a taboo, I feel. We don't talk enough. I think we have to start being more open about it, even though it's not easy, especially for someone who has a speech impediment. It was very hard for me in the past to talk about it like I do now. And it's a process. It takes time, but I think it's important that we try to talk about stammering, disfluency as much as we can, to try to bring more also awareness about this topic to people who don't know that much about it, and to also, I think, make ourselves feel more comfortable in our own skin, in our own shoes, which is very important as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you. It's lovely to have been part of this conversation and part of, well, your mission to keep that dialogue open and to reach more people in the conversation. Yeah, I'm very grateful for having been invited to speak with you.
Thank you for all of your contribution to the stammering community. It's very important to have people advocating for us and trying to help the community. So that's great. I am definitely grateful for that. Thank you.
It's been lovely collaborating. Yeah, thank you.
Thank
you. Take care and good luck with it all. Yeah. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.